Good morning, Bill Thompson for Outside Insiders. I'm just standing here outside their ABC in beautiful downtown South Bank. I might add that the Australia 108 building, which has been under construction for about 2 years, has reached its final height in the central core. And residents have been living in the building on lower floors for probably over 12 months now. This redevelopment of the South Bank Boulevard has been going on for around about the same period, and as you'll see, a ground level project is still not done. But one thing that they have completed is the tram stop here, literally a few paces from the front door of their ABC. Interestingly enough, when I was down outside their ABC earlier this morning and saw the arrival of Anthony Albanese, he didn't come by tram. He arrived by fuel-guzzling, CO2-emitting, chauffeur-driven Commonwealth limo. V8, I believe. I could be wrong. I'm just returning to Moore Street. Anthony is currently being interviewed by David Spears in the studio, and I'm going to stroll around the corner and await the exit by chauffeur-driven, CO2 emitting Albo to record that for posterity and hopefully post it later. I'll get back to you soon. Bill Thompson for Outside Insiders, just waiting at the exit from their ABC's secure car park to see if I can say hello to Albo as he departs. He was inside spruiking climate change and reducing emissions, and bugger me if here he is departing in the chauffeur-driven Commonwealth limo. G'day, Albo. What about the CO2, mate? Yes, as I have commented before, and I'll include it in the video, there is a tram stop at the front door of their ABC, and anyone who was so committed to everybody else reducing their CO2 emissions, anyone who isn't an absolute hypocrite would try to do everything they can to reduce their own CO2 emissions at the same time as they're lecturing everyone else. And one of the ways that Albo could do that is to arrive at their ABC by tram. But now, as most of these politicians on both sides of the aisle do, they take the easy way out. There was some discussion over the filthy, disgusting arrangements that the coalition made in terms of directing funding to marginal seats at the last election. And that's a serious matter. It shouldn't have happened in the way that it happened, apparently. But notwithstanding the sports rorts affair, I'm unaware of anyone in the coalition ranks, for example, who has been accused of rape over the years. And it's my understanding that the then leader of the Labor Party back in 2014 made a public announcement about the fact that there had been an investigation and that no charges were going to be laid, and that was all he intended to say on the matter. But it appears to remain the fact that out of the senior politicians in Australia currently, I believe Bill Shorten is the only one who's actually been accused of rape. I created a bit of a montage of photos of Labor luminaries. Michael Williamson was the national president of the ALP for a period of time. He was subsequently tried and convicted of stealing millions of dollars from the members of the HSU, and he served some time in jail. I believe he's out now. But talk about hypocrisy. The Labor Party is all over the issue of directing funding to marginal seats when their own former national president was found guilty of stealing millions of dollars from the members of the HSU. Eddie Obeid is back in the news again. In fact, I did see Albo arriving and departing for some examination at a current court proceeding. So I don't know the details, but who knew what when Eddie Obeid was on the scene conducting himself in the way that he apparently did. Ian MacDonald was convicted and in jail, but he subsequently had his conviction quashed. I'm unaware of whether new proceedings are in the pipeline for Ian. Craig Thompson. This picture was when he was in court in Parliament, crying because of the stress that he was under over allegations that he'd been using HSU members' money to use the services of hookers and the like. The hypocrisy beggars belief. Milton Orkopoulos, I believe, was behind bars for kiddie fiddling. Michael Coates-Trotter, I believe he's the spouse of Tanya Plibersek, and he, of course, served time in jail before that relationship started, but he was a convicted heroin trafficker. My question is, why does Labor attract so many crooks and, amongst other things, drug traffickers? Bernard Finnegan, I believe he served time in jail for kiddie fiddling. Gordon Nuttall, a scandal-ridden Queensland politician. And John Brown. I was a tax officer for 26 years, and we used to get daily media updates of stories that had appeared in the public media that in some cases had taxation implications. And sometime in the mid-90s, I think, there was a report about court proceedings that the previous Tourism Minister, John Brown, had appealed against an amended assessment of his tax returns because, according to the newspaper report, sometime in the late 80s, early 1990s, around the time John Brown left Parliament, a Gold Coast property developer had decided that John Brown was such a good bloke, for no particular reason, just he was a good bloke, decided to give him a Gold Coast apartment in a new high-rise development that was worth about $1 million. with the furnishings and fittings and stamp duty, I believe. The whole kit and caboodle was donated to John Brown. And according to the newspaper report, it may be that sometime later the tax office examined John Brown's tax return or returns for the relevant period and found that the gift, the so-called gift of the $1 million Gold Coast unit had not been disclosed in the tax return. I gather from the newspaper report that an ATO investigation or audit took place, and it was determined that the acquisition of the unit was related to whatever capacity they determined, apparently, that this was assessable income, and they assessed John Brown on the $1 million gain. And the calculation, if I recall from the newspaper reports, was that about $475,000 of tax had been avoided. And so John Brown had an amended assessment to include the $1 million gain, acquisition, assessed on the approximately $475,000 in tax, plus incorrect return penalty. Now, the way the system works is the tax office can issue an amended assessment, and an individual has a right to object. And an objection is dealt with in-house at the tax office. Another tax officer reviews the background information and the audit report and decides whether the assessment, amended assessment, should be overturned. If an objection is lodged, investigated, and then declined, a taxpayer has a right to appeal to the courts for a further review. And from my reading of the newspaper reports, John Brown subsequently did appeal to the courts. And this is when finally tax audits and the results of tax audits become public knowledge. Once it goes to court on appeal, then the public gets to know what's been going on. And that's when I became aware of the case. At the time, I was living in Albury, and I contacted my local member, who was Tim Fisher at the time, and sent him a letter referring him to this newspaper article about the former Tourism Minister John Brown avoiding $475,000 in tax. And I asked Tim if he could check to see whether John Brown had disclosed the acquisition of the unit in his parliamentary register. My recollection is that I got a reply from Tim or his office saying that he was unable to comment on the matter, or words to that effect. But I subsequently, over a number of years, saw ongoing media reports about John Brown's continuing appeal efforts to avoid paying the amount that had been assessed in relation to this matter. And my vague recollection is that sometime in the early 2000s, the matter may have been settled. And of course, where settlements occur, the public often doesn't find out what actually happened. But so this is my hit parade of why does Labor attract so many crooks, rauters, pedophiles, drug traffickers and tax cheats? I think it's a good question. Bill Thompson for Outside Insiders.